and welcome to Anatomy of Tone. In this week's podcast, I sat down with Farhad Sohaili from FSC Instruments to discuss the origins of his interests in music, where he grew up, his family life, and his inspirations, right up to his philosophies in building guitars, designing guitar pedals, and collaborating with Henry Amps on a black panel style modified bassman. I've been a fan of FSC for quite a while now. I have all the FSC pedals, and there have been occasions where Farhad has brought out one of his guitars for me to use at a gig, and I've always been impressed with his craftsmanship, whether I've taken a guitar in to be repaired or I've been playing one of his guitars. There's a level of nuance there that you don't get from a lot of mass-produced guitars. And as you'll hear me mention in the podcast, it's not like you can't make music with mass-produced guitars, but there is a level of nuance that you don't get that inspires creativity, and I think just makes things easier because things sound right more easily than they do sometimes when you have to troubleshoot and compensate for some of the limitations due to mismatched components and wood and such on a mass-produced guitar. Well, you're going to hear Farhad talk about a lot of this stuff and get some insight into the level of nuance that he considers and thinks about all the time when he is making anything in his FSC line, which is really a labor of love. It's not like a marketing ploy. It's clear that there's a lot of mindfulness that goes into the development of everything that Farhad does, whether it's from instrument repairs to designing and building guitars to designing, collaborating with pedal makers and amp makers. There's a pretty deep thoughtfulness that is involved in all of those components, which I think you'll be impressed with and you'll notice from this interview. Let's just jump right into it. Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Tone. I'm talking to Farhad Sohaili, and we were just having a conversation before the tape rolled about the pronunciations of names. I've known Farhad for a while now, and I didn't properly know the pronunciation. I can't even speak your last name, and I have a similar experience with my wife, whose last name technically is Ahmed. Her family's origins in Palestine, but of course, by the time they came here, people had a hard time spelling it. Of course, being an immigrant, the times that her family came over, even now, is tricky. So it eventually got changed to Ahmad, and very Americanized. But you were saying that your name was spelled differently when you came here, because I thought it was Sohaili, right?
It's spelled it's pronounced Sohaili. That's how it's said, but it is spelled Soheili, which you would read that as Sohaili, and that's what most people call it. I don't know what caused that. I think it was just like when we moved to the United States when I was, 5 years old. That's just kind of what happened.
Where were you born?
I was born in Iran, and then we moved out because there was a war there. And we moved to Europe for a little bit. We lived in Germany, I think for maybe under a year, and then we moved to Orange County, California.
Oh, okay. So you landed in LA pretty much.
Then we did actually move to LA after that too. So
what made your parents come to California and Orange County as opposed to being in Germany?
Right. Well, I'm not sure why we moved. I think we were only living in Germany until I would have to ask my parents because it's been, more than 40 years. But I think it was just because it's not that easy to just move to the United States from there. You kind of have to get a visa and do this and that. I think we were just in Germany temporarily. I don't think that was supposed to be a long-term thing.
Oh, it was more like a transition.
Right. And California is just because we had family there and they had some friends there, from the old country. So my cousins were there. My parents' close friends are there. So it was just an easy, if you're going to leave everything behind, that's kind of your best bet is to go somewhere where you at least know a few people.
Sure, just get you into the network, get you started as opposed to completely starting from scratch.
And they didn't even know English that well back then, so I'm sure that all helped and helped them find work and that kind of stuff.
Were there musicians in your family?
No, not really. I think when I was 13 or 14, my parents just asked us if we wanted to learn musical instruments, or they kind of just decided that we're all going to play stuff. There was a period where we all got musical instruments, and it's kind of a funny story, actually. I wanted a guitar because I was really into punk rock back then. I was a teenager, but they got me lessons with this guy who couldn't have been the more opposite of that. He was, which I'm grateful for now because I know some music theory. I know how to play the modes and those kind of things. But I couldn't have given a fuck about that back. Can I cuss?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Back then, because like I wanted to just play like punk songs. I wanted to play like I was into like Fugazi, and I'm a teenager, so the thing, whatever was on MTV was like Nirvana and all that was going on. That's all I was interested in. But I had like a nylon string acoustic that they bought me, and and I was taking like classical guitar lessons. So I quit, and I said, I don't like guitar anymore. And it wasn't until like maybe a year or two later where my friend found me like a cool guitar teacher, that we both would go to in Southern California, and then he would teach me all the stuff I knew. And then once I discovered like Jimi Hendrix and those guys, then it was over. That was it, Yeah, as far as guitar goes. I was probably like 15 or 16, and I just became obsessed, learning every single Jimi Hendrix song, And I used to know how to play them pretty well back. I've forgotten most of it now just because I don't practice that much anymore. But yeah, that's still what I like when I play guitar. Yeah.
That's funny. I had a very similar experience when I started playing guitar. I got guitar lessons when I was young, and I was already listening to like Abbey Road and things. And then they were teaching me Mary Had a Little Lamb and stuff out of the Mel Bay book, and I was just like, my eyes were glossed over because it didn't resonate with me.
Yeah,
I mean,
you just want power chords and leads,
Yeah, I just want to like make you feel like you're playing something that you could relate to. And I was at the point being taken to nightclubs and stuff, and I saw some musicians playing a Stratocaster, and that's what got me interested in guitar. I was like, I want one of those, you know? And so, yeah, like playing an acoustic guitar and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something. It just was like, it's just so far. It's like, this is not at all.
I get that might have been the traditional teaching method back then or something, but it just, you just want to immediately hit something and have it sound good, So I don't know, and have it be what you like.
Yeah, I've tried to think about that a lot when I teach now, is that when students come in, and most of my students are intermediate to advanced these days, but when I was teaching more beginner students, I would really consider a lot what they were into and try to find that avenue, because that's what's inspiring them, right? And cling tight to that inspiration.
Sure.
So you have a brother or a sister? Or?
I have a younger brother.
Younger brother.
Yeah, he lives in California.
Does he still play music?
No, I mean, he plays a little guitar. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a hobby for him. But yeah, he plays decent. He actually, I think, last I visited was a little more than a year ago. He has like a classical guitar. He plays, he plays a lot of different stuff on it. Yeah, definitely.
Still like in the same area where you spent most of your.
Yeah, youth? We grew up they're like in the suburbs of LA. My parents, so around there. Yeah, yeah.
And you were there like kind of at the height of the Orange County pop punk movement, right?
Yeah, I was just too young. I was like, in Orange County when we lived there, the oldest I was probably like 12 or 13. The oldest I would have been is like 12 or 13. So by the time we were in LA, it's funny, like I grew up in, and I say this because there's actually a normal part of, it's not just like Kanye and Drake. I grew up in Calabasas, but there's a normal part of Calabasas that regular people do live, or used to live in, at least, So, and the thing then was like Incubus and those guys went to my high school, so everybody was into that. But I couldn't have been more opposite. I couldn't relate to any of that music. I was really just super into punk music, and I was into Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix, but that was it, And then I was also like always, and I still am, into hip hop, because in 91 it was like MTV and all that, and that really stuck with me. So like when Nirvana and those bands blew up, there was also like Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and that was all just like, I thought all music is that good always. Little did I know like what would happen afterwards.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that was a very interesting period. It's like,
right.
Yeah, I think you find that in history, like the years of 1978 to 1981 was like a really potent time, and there's just certain like 71, 73, the early 90s, like there was so much great music. It was very creative and interesting.
I'm glad I was alive and a kid then, because I can't imagine doing that now. There's just so much going on at all times everywhere that there's just such an overload of, but back then it was just like you had a few channels, even if you had cable, that you just had those MTV, those VH1, and there were just like a few radio stations that everybody would listen to, so, and then I would, once I discovered sort of like indie music, and then I got, into bands like that, and that's kind of how it went.
And then you moved to LA, and you finished high school there. Did you go to college or?
Not really, no. Yeah, I knew right away that I was going to move to New York. And I thought it was going to be as a guitarist. And when I moved here, I was 26, I think, 26. and I was actually making my rent. I mean, I had roommates, but it was doing session guitar work and teaching guitar lessons. And I'm jumping ahead of like the whole what I do now, which is, FSC guitars. But eventually I started doing that just because of both I had the skill set and because of necessity, I'll never forget, I had a mic. I was at a band practice and I had a microphone hit the fretboard of my guitar. I don't know if you've ever had that happen. It presses the strings into the frets if it hits hard enough and they indent the frets. I mean, if you have stainless steel frets, it might not happen as bad, but they were nickel silver frets. And I knew what needed to happen because I'm 26. I've already done guitar repair at this point. We'll talk about that, but I knew exactly what it needed a fret level. It didn't need a refret or anything. And so I was in Manhattan and I called around. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything. I called around a few shops. It's funny because the shop I spoke to is still in business and we're kind of buddies now, but like they gave me such a crazy price that I was like, holy, and this is like 15 years ago or something. And I'm like, that's what they charge here in New York for that, So I'm like, it's it's in the higher register. It's just like a partial fret level. So I saw an opening in the market where, you don't have to be the most expensive. If you charge just the reasonable rate where you're making your whatever you need to make, and you're not really taking the customer for a ride or anything. And I'm like, I'm like, I know how much time it takes. I know what needs to happen. So I just bought the tools and did it myself. And then I started just kind of advertising and talking to people and posting online that, hey, I do guitar repair. And it kind of snowballed from there. And then, I ended up working at Ludlow Guitars back in the day when they were in business in the Lower East Side. And I ended up managing that repair shop for a while before I went fully independent. And then, way before we started building guitars too. Around 1996 or 7, I was a teenager and I got I had a crappy like nylon string guitar that, mile high action, play like hell. I never liked it. Finally, I got my mom to buy me just like a Squier Strat in the mid 90s. And back then they were really not great guitars. They're pretty nice now. Some of those.
Yeah, the quality control has gotten a lot better. Yeah.
Especially those Squier classic vibes. Those are really nice. I think. Yeah. But so this is a plywood Strat that my mom got me, and I knew I wanted a Strat. I don't know why. It was just probably just a very common electric guitar and easily available. I'd seen so many photos and videos of them, and so she got me that. She got me a very simple Squier solid state amp and a DS1 pedal, and that was it. Until I thought that was it. I thought that was as far as I would go with guitar. Until, again, I discovered Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix by the time I was 16 or 17. And I knew, looking at my guitar, that it wasn't what they had. I didn't know in what aspect. I didn't know anything about nitrocellulose lacquer. I didn't know anything about vintage guitars back then. I didn't know anything about like vintage tuner. I just know mine didn't look like theirs, even though it was the same type of guitar.
Oh, you sussed that out.
Yeah. There was something in I knew right away, like, this is not the same. So I just immediately started trying to modify my own guitar as a teenager in my parents' house. I started to, just with my dad's, basic tool set. I remember there was a big round file where I took off the tuners and I jaggedly, terribly, creating a big uneven hole, opened the tuners up a bit, the post holes up a bit so I could fit different tuners in there. And there was like one catalog. This is like pre-internet even, or internet was just coming out, where there was just one like musician, whatever catalog, and you could buy parts. So I learned how to replace my tuners and my pickguard, and I made the guitar different. And that was I realized I did something to this guitar, and then I kind of fucked it up in that process where I ruined the pickups, and we had to go to we were in LA, so we had to go to the guitar repair shop. It was Eric's guitar shop, who he's still in business. He has a huge business now. And I remember going there. He has all these pictures of like Metallica and the Red Hot Chili people that thank you for fixing my guitar. And that's when I realized that's a job, even that like guitar lutherie is a job, guitar repair, guitar building is a job. Obviously I knew it existed on some level, but I was a kid, so and it got to the point where I became so obsessed with just modifying and changing things on my guitar as I did with playing the guitar. It went hand in hand for me. So I was there all the time. My mom would literally just drop me off, go away for hours, and come back and pick me up at that repair shop. It's something I'd be very annoyed if somebody did in my shop now. 17-year-old kid, hey, what kind of strings did Stevie Ray Vaughan use? Like, that was me all day, just pestering them. But luckily, he was very patient and let me hang out there. And just by watching them work, I learned a lot. And I eventually just started doing setups and wiring at home, just for myself, just so I could mess with my own guitars. And then I just, through reading books and practicing over years, it got to the point where I could do it for friends. And then I got the confidence to do it professionally by the time I was in my 20s when I moved to New York. That's kind of how the whole thing started. Yeah.
So, in a lot of ways, it was almost like a mentorship when you were in that shop.
Sort of. I mean, I don't even know if he would remember me now, but like it was very casual, unspoken mentorship. You know what I mean? Yeah, very.
Or like spying.
Sort of. I mean, they were very generous with their time, and they would let me ask them questions while they were working, and they would certainly let me watch them work and things like that. And I spent a lot of time there back in the mid '90s, and shout out to Eric. You should take your guitar to him if you're in LA. I think he's in Van Nuys. I would have to check, but yeah, he's a very great dude. I really appreciate him letting me hang out there. And I keep that in mind. So when people come in and they ask me questions at the shop or, I'm very patient with those kind of things. I try to be at least,
Right. Yeah, because people, I mean, if they're interested in the things that you're interested in sometimes, they're always just trying to steal things from you. They have a genuine, they're into the same things.
We're there for a common cause. It's guitars.
Yeah. So when you were just hanging out and observing, obviously asking a lot of questions, how did you have anybody that mentored you at some point that you learned
no, really it was just videos and books. Obviously I started reading a lot of books, and there was like Dan Earlywine, his guitar setup book really helped. Then it was a lot of just practicing on my own instruments. I didn't know how to do precise work until I was in my 20s when I learned about like buying a straight edge or buying, guitar specific rulers from like StewMac, things like that. And then learning what, the right, you can say high and low action, you can say, straight neck, but to know the difference between a neck that has 6 thousandths of relief versus 12 thousandths of relief, those are all fairly straight, right? Or
that straight is vague,
right? Exactly. Or saying low action versus saying 60 thousandths at the 12th fret, or saying 16 thousandths at the nut, at the first fret. Those are all key things that we do now in our building and in our guitar repairs that come in or setups that come in. Those are really important to have those dots. I didn't know that stuff when I first started. Obviously, I knew that. I figured that out in my 20s and into my 30s, and really refined it over the years. And now we have a very specific thing that I've actually written out where we do I wouldn't call it proprietary, but somewhat it is we just do everything in a very, very extremely precise way. Yeah. So, I would say that's why we have such I would say 90 to 95% of the time, everybody's super happy. And then that 5%, we just have to make minor adjustments, Yeah. So.
Well, yeah, because to some degree, I mean, there's bound to always being a need to adjust for somebody, because you're kind of playing mind reader when you do a setup.
You have to tailor it to their playing. So I can do the setup as I would have done it 1,000 times before, and everybody's happy, but that one person may want something a little different. And that's kind of the thing. That's why you go to somebody who's going to customize your setup or your instrument to you.
And then they learn you over time when we take an instrument.
Right. That's a difference between going to a specialist and going just dropping it off at the guitar store, for example. You're talking and dealing with me directly, and if there's a problem, I'm the one that's fixing it, and you're sitting there while I'm doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
right. Absolutely. You're getting more in the head.
Yeah, and I don't really have an attitude or an ego about it these days. I mean, I did when I was younger, but now if there's a problem, I'm gonna side with the customer unless they're being completely unreasonable, which is almost never the case.
Right.
Like, we kind of don't work with this. When I get a sense of that, where it's like, all right, this is just like, I can't. I tell them, I'm like, I don't think I can do the thing you want. You know what I mean?
Right.
But again, like 99% of the time, that's not the case.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And if you're in a state of trying to I'm going to figure out what it is that you need.
Yeah.
That maybe you don't know how to explain clearly.
Right. I just kind of share knowledge whenever somebody brings in a guitar to us or is asking us to build them something. I share what I know. I tell them, you want a realistic expectation of what this guitar can do and, where we can go with this. And I tell them, if you did fretwork, this would happen. If you did just a setup, this would happen. And it's up to you. These are the costs, and you can decide on what will happen. I can tell you what the outcome would be either way,
Right. Yeah. You choose what you want. But
I don't like surprise costs when I'm doing it, when I'm buying or doing anything, and I don't like to do that to our customers either. Even if it's just a couple of dollars, I just kind of run it by them. It's just, how long does it take to type up 2 sentences on an email? You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's always nice. I've been surprised before in the past when I've had something in for repair or something done, and I show up and I'm like, whoa, that was $400. Like,
exactly.
I didn't, like,
that happens.
I respect that. I just didn't know that was what was coming.
Yeah. I don't like that experience. So we don't give that experience to people. Also, I feel like in New York City, no matter what you're doing, in a lot of cases, you're kind of getting fucked. It's like you're paying for something that you shouldn't be paying for. So I take that out of the equation always. If our rent goes up, I'm transparent. I'm like, hey guys, we have to raise our prices a little bit because the rent went up, or the cost of doing business is more, the cost of guitar parts, lumber, everything is more now.
Sure.
And we just have to gradually, slightly raise, you know?
Because if you don't, it's like you can't make guitars unless you can make enough money to make guitars.
I'd have to move somewhere else. Yeah.
Right,
So we just try to, you know, we meet our bottom line and we just try to be as transparent as fair as possible, and it's worked out pretty well. You know? I feel like that's a good policy.
I think it is. I think that's the policy to have long-term people that are going to come back and just always, you know.
That's kind of how you sustain a business, I think. And that's why, you know, some of our customers have been with us since day one, and, you know, almost all of them end up being repeat customers. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah.
How'd you end up in New York? You just came here cold and...
Well, I had visited New York enough times when I was younger, like as a teenager. I had a cousin who was in law school here, and I would just come here just to hang out and go out and stuff, because I just knew there was nothing for me in LA. I don't know how I knew that as a kid, because even now when I go back, I still feel that way. I'm like I love going there for vacation. I love LA. I mean, it's home. It's where my closest friends and family are, but like I just feel like the opportunities are not there for me. And I feel like if I had stayed there always, I'd still probably do what I'm doing, but it would have been on a much smaller scale. And it would have probably been like, I would have just been like another person who does that there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Whereas I just always knew as a kid that I wanted to come to New York, and like the opportunities were in New York, and you just kind of hustle and you make it work. And that's kind of what ended up happening, you know? Yeah.
And when you came to New York, how long did it take you to start getting a gig? You got a job at Ludlow pretty quickly? Or were you...
Well, okay. So when I came to New York, within, I would say 2 to 3 years, I was doing good. Like I already had the skill set. We can talk about that later, but I was doing guitar repair part-time, just off word of mouth and stuff within 2 or 3 years of moving. First, I mean, I was obviously just doing it for myself and friends and things like that. But then I was like, all right, well, I kind of need a career. You know, I was probably pushing late 20s, early 30s at this point, and I realized that, you know, like I'm not really that good of I'm an okay guitar player. I'm not good enough to where I could be a session guitar player for the rest of my life, or where I'm good enough to like, you know, get like a really consistent thing like that, you know. So, and I also like don't really like playing shows or anything like that, so that's out the door. So, you know, it became a necessity thing, you know, and I think within a couple years I was doing it part-time, and then, you know, back then I would go to your house, meet you, and like I would either pick up your guitar, take it back home and work on it out of my little tiny bench in my apartment with minimal tools, or I would even do it on the spot for like maybe like a little bit more money. And it's funny because even that maximum money is less than what a setup costs now, where you have to like wait a week before you even come into the shop. You know? Right. Or, you know, maybe not a week, but you definitely have to make an appointment, you know? Yeah. So yeah, I think about that. You don't forget that. I always think about that. I think no matter how far FSC goes, I'm always going to remember A, being broke, and B, just that hustle, you know, because you don't, once you forget that, you're just, you know, your head gets too big, I think, you know.
It's one interesting thing about New York is it's really a grind.
Yeah.
And
it all, no matter what, I think it is for everybody.
I do too.
Just because it's so, you're not supposed to succeed here. You know what I mean? It's so, the opportunity is there, the population is there, obviously the demand is there, but everything about the city is working against you. You know what I mean? Like the cost of living here, the cost of rent here, the quality of life, all those things are not great. You know what I mean? So it's the weather, you know, so, and especially being from Southern California, you know, so it's not much less expensive in LA, but you do, at least there's the beach, you know, you might get a little more space for your money, or, you know, whatever it is. So
in some ways it's a little more forgiving. Like New York is, I mean, it's just so incredible, but at the same time it's very challenging. So you really have to work to live here. And you have to be pretty rich in order for that to not be a factor, because even people who are pretty successful, it's still a bit of a grind here.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the reason I'm still here is, I mean, obviously, you know, FSE became popular, but also it's like, I have, you know, I wouldn't say low overhead, but I, you know, the apartment that I live in, I've had for a really long time. It's not super cheap, but it's, you know, it would be, you know, it's better than if I got it today, obviously. You know, it'd be insane if I got it today.
You're like in the New York system now.
Right,
you
I wouldn't be in that neighborhood
today,
you know what I mean? Yeah. So, just, you know, I feel like with most businesses, whether it's guitars or whatever you're doing, if you're good and if you're hustling and if you kind of get your ass kicked for 5-6 years and you stick it out, you know, there are many times where I wanted to quit and leave. But I stayed, and it's been like more than 15 years now. So obviously we kind of carved out a little thing for ourselves. You know?
Yeah, New York is like that. It's like it just kicks
Yeah.
you in the ass, and you're like, I can't take it anymore.
Right.
And you go somewhere else for a week, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I have to get back to New York.
Right.
Yeah.
Every February, I'm like, fuck this, man. I'm done. You know? I'm like, what am I doing here? You know? I'm like, I'm 43. I'm like, how am I still doing, But I'm like, you know what? March or April, whenever it gets nice happens, I'm like, this is why I live here. This is why I'm here. It's the opportunities. It's all the awesome stuff that happens in New York that when the weather's good and, it's a different city when the weather's nice,
It's a very different city. It's always people are, I always enjoy like when it gets close to the season turnover, it's like there's the person that's always waiting for that first almost mild day and they have shorts on.
Yeah, that's me.
And that's you. And then like the restaurants, like even if they have their tables out on the sidewalk, they're like ready to go. We're like, we're here.
Absolutely.
And then the next day it's like cold and rainy.
We always get that fake out, that spring. We had that because I was wearing shorts about 3 or 4 weeks ago for a day. I was like, all right, it's like 65. I was running, I was wearing shorts, and then back to the cold, But we're on the cusp of it being nice again. So I think within a week or two we're there.
It's close.
Hopefully.
Yeah. There's always those couple of months that are tough.
Yeah, I think April is hit or miss, and then by May you're kind of set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's something that comes with that struggle though of it being difficult here that is in some ways beneficial to the arts in a weird way. It's kind of weird to say that, but I feel like I don't know, it keeps everybody pretty close to the struggle. And
you have to be on 10 at all times. You can't rest on your laurels here.
No.
And I feel like in LA, because I did spend a significant amount of time in LA about a year and a half ago. I was there for like 4.5 months. FSC was running I was managing it remotely, but I wasn't hands-on I just needed some time off. It had been so many years, But everything is just, I was like, man, it's snail pace here. I was like, what is everybody waiting for? We make plans, let's do this, let's do that. I'm like, yeah, let's simmer on that. I'm like, what are we waiting on? I'm like, well, let's go. I'm here. So, and I was working a little bit out there. I was just doing like repair work, just here and there for friends or friends of friends or people that kind of knew us on Instagram. And I think I kind of brought that New York hustle where I was doing everything very quickly because that's just kind of instilled in me at this point.
They're like, whoa, hey,
I definitely
calm down.
I walk and talk faster than any of my friends now over there,
Yeah,
and you really feel it when you go there when you see them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I've always felt that I've noticed that with like New York musicians too. I mean, there's great musicians all over the world.
Yeah,
but the New York musicians are fast and sharp in a way because they have to survive. It's not like they just want to be that way. It's like they have to play 3 gigs a night and then they do a rehearsal and a session in the afternoon in order to pay their rent.
Yes,
so because of that, they learn songs quickly. They could adapt quickly, and obviously that's a broad generalization and it's not always true. But there is that character.
Well, the good ones, that's true. You know what I mean? The ones that last.
Yeah,
absolutely. I feel like again, you kind of have to be the best of the best in New York. That's how I feel about it. If you're gonna
really
last,
do. Yep.
I've seen people be lazy here, and I've seen it. I mean, it's sad. I see what happens that they kind of have to go back home. You know what I mean? They can only do that for so long.
Yep, and you have to keep the hustle going, no matter it doesn't slow down. Like
that's why whenever I feel the burnout, I'm like, all right, it's time to take a little time off so I can come back strong here. You know what I mean? Because you have to be at top of your game.
And you have help, right? So you can take a little time.
Right,
off.
exactly. So in the last few years, I've had help, which has really made a tremendous difference, both in terms of collaborative ideas, in terms of design and things like that. I will like pitch. I end up, I obviously have the final say of everything, but I'm like Ross, who works with me, for example, he really gives me a lot of ideas with, some of the design things I do or, pedals and things like that. And also just like, the actual labor, there's help there, which, is very good. It allows things to go on. And sometimes I might just be like, I need a little time off, guys. How's it going to look? And we kind of figure that out as a team,
Because I imagine being a small business, there's so many aspects that you have to take care of that I think the general public doesn't. It's not that they're ignorant; they just don't. We don't know none of
right. You might not think. Well, what's funny about that is me currently being just the main guy there. I mean, I guess I always will be the main guy there, but a lot of my days, I'll go to the shop, but like I don't actually touch a guitar for hours because like I'm doing admin work, I'm answering emails, I'm ordering parts, who knows what I'm doing? I'm like looking at, enclosures and this and that. And so there's a lot of times where, that's kind of just the day. And by that afternoon, I'll start actually working on doing some fretwork or something like that. But yeah, without the help at this point, FSC just couldn't even exist because there's just so much going on. You know, I would have a backlog of like 5 years if it was just me. You know what I mean?
That's a lot. And
Yeah,
not
whereas,
to mention, I mean, even doing, you're very active on social media, and you're
Mhm.
always taking great pictures and
right.
really highlighting your gear in a really enticing way. I feel like your guitars look great in your photos, but
Thanks.
that takes a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
Like even just to put one post up. I mean, anytime I do it, it's like I start getting burnt out. Like I have to
Yeah.
hashtag it, then I have to tag people, and I have to
Yeah, you
upload it. And
you have to be kind of a jackass of all trades. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I see it. I do the videos. I often have to play in the videos, even though I hate doing that. You know, I have to be in the video, and because of that, like, I mean, it's helped with branding because people recognize me, so that's good. Like
Right.
people see me in the streets and they recognize me sometimes. So I'm like, oh, it's because I was in the video, or it's because I did this or that. But
Right.
like, so you know, I have to do the marketing. I have to think about, you know, how do we constantly grow? How do we not become stagnant? How do we always have cool new products? You know, that's just, you're just always on. You know, it's kind of all consuming. You know,
Mhm.
yeah.
As a company in current times, how much do you feel the pressure that you have to have new products versus just making a couple of things and just like
Well,
having that be your main?
Yeah, that's definitely something on my mind at all times. With FSC, I've redesigned our guitar line over the years 3 times now. You know, I treat it like kind of either an art project or a kind of how a band would function almost, where you put out new records, and if you're good, you're changing and evolving, and you're not always putting out the same. You know, we might do, obviously vintage inspired guitars, but the designs and the shapes and the things we do have changed over the years, and the ideas have changed a little bit, and they've become refined, and they've become better over the. I look at something I designed and built like 5-6 years ago, and I'm not that excited about it anymore. You know, I mean, it's cool, I appreciate it for what it was, but it's always about that next thing, and it's always about that next idea, and it's how cool can we make this like classic looking guitar look, and you know, what can we do to actually make it better, you know? So that's always, something on my mind. For example, like all of our guitar, I love the look of a vintage headstock on say a F style guitar, but, and I don't like the truss rod to be at the headstock, but for it to be at the heel, you have to take the neck off, right? And adjust it, which I hate on a vintage style guitar. So we immediately put the wheel there so you can adjust it in the playing position. That's been on all of our guitars forever. That's just one thing, there's a lot of things like that. There's, product design and those kind of things. We call it manic mode for me, because every few years I kind of lock myself indoors for about 3 to 4 days, and just a bunch of new stuff comes out, or a bunch of new ideas come out. So I can't do that all the time, but I feel like that's pretty common in a creative, you have your moments where you're writing and recording, for example, and that's kind of how I treat designing.
And then you go on tour,
and then you build it and you put it out, and you put it to market, and hopefully it sells. You know what I mean? And then you do that for a few years, and then you have to come up with new stuff. Yeah.
So you're approaching it more from the perspective of, okay, I want to continue to grow with my products. You're not necessarily trying to think of it as a marketing perspective.
No, I have to love the thing, and then we market it. I don't look at, oh, there's an opportunity for me to make money this way. I never do that, because I have to really care about what I'm making and putting out. Otherwise I wouldn't want to do it. I would just go back to doing repairs only, Yeah.
When you design a guitar, how, because it starts out as an idea, and on paper, I'm sure you're drawing it and figuring out all the specs.
Yeah.
How many do you have to build typically before you feel like it starts to represent what your idea started out as?
It's funny is they start as drawings, they're engineering drawings like on computer, but or sometimes they're even done on a piece of paper, and then I have to translate that. But yeah, they look much different as a drawing than they do in person, obviously. You know what I mean? So when you cut out, sometimes we do several prototypes, and I find problems with them over time. Sometimes I immediately find a problem, and then we kind of refine that. The general thing is right there, but over time that is refined. So you asked how long does it take, or
how many you end up building?
How many do I before I'm happy with it? Sometimes, honestly, you nail it in one shot, and I feel like over the years that's become more common. Or you nail it and there's just very little changes. But back in the 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. You know what I mean? 10 years ago, it would have taken a lot more than that. So I feel like you kind of evolve and you get better at what you do. And sometimes I will, though, build something and nobody will ever see it, outside of the people that know me. And sometimes I'll build things that I kind of refine for a bit, and then we put it out, So it could be anywhere from immediately to more than a year, Yeah.
What's different about this year's models in the redesign? What have you changed?
So when when I took that time off about a year and a half ago, and I just kind of went to LA, I was so burnt out that I was gonna obviously come back, but it was supposed to be 2 months. It turned to like more than 4 months, and I kind of needed that to reset. I didn't even really know what was going on. I just knew I couldn't be here anymore, and I just had to go away. And I didn't plan on designing or working at all, really. But after I spent enough time on the beach and enough time, getting stoned, or enough time seeing my friends and family in LA, and all the things you would do in LA, go hiking, and then I just naturally pulled up my computer and started designing again, just very casually, without any goal, without any purpose, right?
Because it's who you are, right? So eventually you just start doing it.
Yeah, I was like, I'm just kind of going back to, I guess, my natural state, but now I'm relaxed. My brain is, working in a creative way again. I'm not dealing with the daily grind of like years of in New York. You know what I mean? I couldn't
plus
be
the post-pandemic
right.
stress,
Yeah, those 2 years were terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, 21 and 22 also sucked. So I left towards the end of 20 or like August of 22, and I came back right before 23. So during that time, I did all these things that became our current guitars, and I didn't even know if I would put those out, but I was in California. I was just really enjoying California, and historically, a lot of great guitars have come out of California too. It turns out, So I designed them, and eventually last spring, all of our new guitars were based off drawings and things that came there. I refined them in New York, but yeah, that's kind of how that went. Yeah.
And what are the difference in the features on them? Have you changed materials at all, or is it just more of like the body shapes are different?
The body shapes are different. They're very familiar, but they're definitely all original. The features are different in terms of we're using almost exclusively right now tempered and roasted tone woods. Which,
why? What reason?
Well, they recreate the properties of a well-aged guitar. They're not always the easiest to work with, actually. But
in what way? What happens?
They can be brittle until you've put paint on them, and they can't. We use a lot of tempered pine, for example, which I actually prefer to alder and ash, which are the more traditional woods for that type of guitar. It's significantly lighter weight. They're resonant as hell, and they just feel really good. But you have to be careful when you're building them. If you bump them around, all of our guitars are somewhat aged for that reason. Also, we use the really thin nitrocellulose lacquer, so they have to have a little bit of aging. Otherwise, like even when I'm putting them together, that a little thing could chip and you ruin the whole thing. So you can work that into the aging, and we do it tastefully. It's not like overdone or anything like that. So that's one thing. We've gotten really heavy. There was this one guitar that it's called the STM 61, based on a 1961 S guitar, right? That I repaired, and it doesn't look identical to that, but it's definitely got all the key features. It's got the deep contours. It's got the neck profile. It's got the pickups, the voicing of the pickups, and the wraps of the as close as I could get to that, and the materials. But I'm using tempered pine on the body. The neck, all of our necks are now very heavily rolled on the fretboard, the fret edges, which I would do medium before, but after this, I was like, I made this one feel like a vintage guitar. So all of our new guitars have that now, no matter what model you buy, and things like that. You just kind of refine over the years.
What is the difference between the medium rolled and like the heavy rolled?
So I'm looking at the guitars here. So a heavy roll on the fretboard edge, when you cut a fretboard, it's very square. It feels bad. And a lot of companies just put that out, actually.
Really?
Yeah, lower end guitars,
Okay.
or even medium guitars, or sometimes even guitars with binding that are expensive. They don't go that extra step. You have to hand detail it to go from this, which is a square, to like a very rounded over edge.
Oh,
I'm talking about the actual wood, right?
Yeah,
on the fretboard. Now we do that very heavily now. So it feels like it's been played for 30 years.
Oh.
And we do that to the fret ends very heavily now. So they feel like they've been, So, those kind of things. When you're buying a premium guitar, you want all the premium features. You don't want any, it's heavily detailed fretwork, which comes from the, 25 years of repair experience and doing, thousands of refrets or whatever it is,
Right.
So. Yeah, it's putting all that into your product.
It's really interesting because that's not something I considered, or I mean, I understood it on a subconscious level, but it's not something I fully consciously understood about the rolled edges like that, because I know sometimes I've played some really old, worn Fenders or something
Yeah.
like there was just something about the neck that
Yeah.
that was different even on like some reissues and stuff. And
Yeah.
and that makes total sense from that wearing it down. It just gets like this rounded, this smooth, like comfortable.
You just want to feel at home when you're playing the thing, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I want people to keep picking the guitar up. You know, the people that typically buy our guitars generally have a lot of guitars. You know, they're big gearheads. You know what I mean? For the most part, you know, sometimes that's not the case, but I want them to play ours just as much as they'll play their favorite vintage guitar, if not more. You know, so or they'll maybe want to take ours on the road instead to you know, preserve their vintage guitar. Or something, you know. They're designed to be played. They're not designed to, you know, so we try to make them feel as good as possible. Even if we make a vintage profile neck, which if you're going with like a late 50s or early 60s, it could be a bigger neck. I still make the shoulders feel very comfortable. So no matter what the neck profile is, it's going to feel good, no matter what your hand size is. You know what I mean? So right now we do a medium and a slightly larger profile. They're not like super chunky or anything, but yeah.
It's interesting you say that because, I mean, as great as Leo was in designing those guitars, I mean, he wasn't a musician.
Right.
And a lot of things got hit head on, but not everybody that was making those guitars was highly skilled either. They were right. Am I right? In the factories, they were put together by workers, and some of them turned out amazing, some of them didn't. But there wasn't as much awareness about musicians as there is now. So it's like you're speaking of taking what was great about that design, but also taking consideration different people's anatomy and hand size and such, and making it playable.
Well, it certainly helps to have a lot of guitar playing under your belt. Certainly, if I wasn't a musician, I think FSC would be a lot different. It would be weird. It would still be a guitar company, but you have to, you know I'm a big vintage guitar fan, and I've worked on a lot of vintage guitars, and I know what they feel and sound like, and that's kind of what we go for now, you know, in terms of feel. We do little things like modern upgrades, like let's say, you know, compound radius fretboard or whatever fretboard radius you want. Typically the 7 1/4 vintage thing isn't the most playable for everybody, you know, or the tiny frets. So you go with bigger frets, you do a compound radius on a vintage style guitar with a vintage, you know, neck profile. We're not the first people to do that by any means, but you know, it can feel like an amazing guitar at that point. You know? And that's kind of, you know, what we strive for. And I don't even know what the next thing would be, but I don't think I'm ever going to be settled. I always want to get better with everything we do, you know? So, yeah.
Right, and your perspective changes, or your
you mature,
changes,
you change, you know. So yeah, things change. Yeah.
Has anything else changed? Has it mostly been feel things like that? Has anything changed with the electronics or the hardware that you?
The hardware and the electronics we use have always kind of been very premium. So you know, I always just buy the best stuff for our guitars. I don't cheap out. As the cost of parts have been rising, we just kind of have to accordingly raise the prices of our guitars. I don't want to be the guy who puts inferior part on a guitar. As long as I own the company, that's never going to be the case, you know, and it's mine. So, yeah.
I wish everybody had that philosophy.
Well, you know, I understand what happens. People take investors and they, you know, things happen. They grow rapidly and, you know, all of a sudden there goes the quality, right? Or there's the era of when they were good and the era of when they're bad. If that ever happens to FSC, I'm going to sell my share. I'll be out, you know, which is, you know, the whole thing.
I mean, parts out there, like that's the thing that always frustrated me about Gibson. And I have several Gibsons I use, but every one of them I've had to gut the electronics because they were horrible. Most of my Gibsons are from the early 90s, which actually there were some. I know people that got some that weren't so good, but all the ones I got are really nice pieces of wood. They feel and they sound vintage, but the electronics that came in them, I mean, there were just some. My Les Paul had the wrong value pots in it, and they had like these circuit boards at the bottom of the pickups. I think they were trying to design a system to be able to put them ththrough the assembly line quicker, and it sounded awful. I almost sold the guitar until I found these hand-wound pickups, and then I gutted and put new caps and everything in it, and all of a sudden now it's amazing.
Right.
But it was just like at that time, I think when I bought that guitar in the early 90s or so, I mean, it was like an $1,800 guitar, which is a lot of money
especially
then.
back then, yeah.
And it was like they were charging all that for like, how much is a nice pot? You know, like it's just
$4 or something.
Yeah, like they still would have made a ridiculous profit off of that.
Yeah, Gibson probably gets them even way cheaper than I do. They probably buy massive quantities.
Yeah, and it was just like I thought that was a little shameful. And I understand they're getting a little bit better about their production processes, but
are they?
I've heard mixed stories. Some people
I can't really
yes
even probably comment on it, but yeah, I mean, I certainly from a repair standpoint, we see a lot of things from other. That's the cool thing about having repairers still be part of the shop is we day to day see everything everybody's doing firsthand. We get everything from production, mass-produced guitars like, Gibson and Fender, to really high-end custom shop things, and then even higher-end boutique things. And I see great things and terrible things in all those, in that entire spectrum. I've seen horrible boutique things that I saw on the internet and thought were had all this hype, and in person I was like, man, this is awful, And I've also seen the opposite, where it's phenomenal, And
What's been the difference? You don't have to mention names, but like what was, like, for example, a boutique guitar that had a lot of hype and probably was a lot of money.
Yeah.
What didn't line up with it?
Fretwork.
Really?
Some of the things that we just discussed: fretwork, assembly, and setup. And really, a lot of it comes down to fretwork. I mean, you really have to do frets right. I mean, that's the thing where anybody can buy a router, anybody can take an investment and start a guitar business, you know what I mean? But if you don't have that background, and if you don't have the right people doing it, it's just, or if you're just way mass producing things in a way where you can't keep up with quality, you have to know how to make a string nut correctly. Nobody makes a string nut correctly. The way we make them, I'm not saying we're the only ones that make them correctly, but I'm saying
a lot of people cut corners.
I mean, like, we're talking like 85
it.
to 90% of guitars that I've seen have either worn down or just incorrect nut slot heights from out the factory. And if you build a guitar with the wrong height of nut slots, or 6 different heights, your setup is never going to be correct no matter what. You can make this neck as straight as possible. You can have the perfect action at the 12th fret, but your foundation is still wrong because the nut, that's a big part of the setup. You know what I mean? So that's a big thing that we have to correct when we do a setup. That's right away. We have a very precise, I don't eyeball it, we have a very precise, down to 1/1,000,000 of an inch measuring tool just designed for the nut slot.
Wow.
After we straighten the neck, that's the next thing.
Do you put a new nut in? You just have to
Well, we give them the option of new nut, or if they're lucky, we have to lower them, not raise them. If we have to raise them, there's ways to raise them with a compound and glue and things like that, if they don't want a full new, because making a new nut from scratch is not cheap. We use bone, and we hand carve it, so that wouldn't be the most cost. Sometimes you just want the setup, and that's all you want. And we're never trying to take anybody for a ride. We just tell them everything that's going on, and they decide. But when we build the guitars, luckily we're at a point where I still can manage down to every nut slot. It has to be perfect. I mean, obviously those wear down over time, and you have to replace them.
It's maintenance, right? I mean, it's like frets, right? Unless you're using stainless steel, it's going to be, they're going to wear.
Absolutely. If you're using a tremolo guitar, like let's say a Strat or something, you do have to take the string nut into considerations. It's a huge thing that nobody seems to be talking about.
Interesting, because with the tremolo system, it's actually wearing on the nuts more because you're
the back and forth. It's acting as especially on the wound strings, it acts as a very soft file. As you go like this, the strings go back and forth,
right,
and they file the nut slot down.
Interesting. Do you feel there's a difference, like with bone?
Bone is more rigid. Yeah, it doesn't mean it doesn't wear down. It just means it's much more rigid than plastic.
So it's a durability, not a sound thing, or
I mean, this is gonna cause people to go crazy, but for an electric guitar, can I say a bone nut is a night and day difference? No, of course not. I would say it's a nice feature. I would say it's more of a feature on an acoustic guitar, and even then, you're primarily talking about the open strings, right?
Right. Right.
But bone nut and saddle on an acoustic guitar is a very nice combo on a nice acoustic guitar, right?
Bone saddle too.
Bone saddle and bone nut is a very nice combo. I'll say that much. Yeah, but
Yeah.
we do make all of our electrics out of bone nuts. I wouldn't say like those synthetic high end bone. I'm sorry, like things like tusk.
Tex and
Yeah,
tusk,
they're not really, obviously they're not made out of tusk. They're a synthetic material. Those are fine too. Those are very nice. Those I don't think there's any tonal difference there. I think they're just different things. You know what I mean? I do consider like low end plastics and things like that to be just budget things that we would never use. But it's more about rigidity though in that case.
I don't think there's any major manufacturers shipping with bone nuts, are there?
There are. Yeah, there are. Yeah, you see them on Fenders, and there are.
Yeah?
Yeah, they exist. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's become actually more and more common over the last few years. A lot of people, even on not terribly expensive guitars, will use bone nuts as a selling point.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a marketing thing.
Huh.
Yeah. But they are. I mean, look, you're if you have a bone nut on a guitar, it's less likely to chip and damage if you bump into it, or if you put the wrong gauge of strings, it won't chip right away at the low E string, where then you have to have it replaced, or what I mean. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And speaking of like boutique builders and looking into guitars, It's become a lot harder to know what to buy these days because we don't have guitar shops anymore. There were fewer choices 50 years ago, but you'd be able to go and play a guitar before you tried it. And now
Absolutely.
You have a shop in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, where people can come and test some of your guitars, right? But there's a lot of times these days when people, if they want to buy your guitar and they live in Hawaii or somewhere, like
they have to gamble online.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on how to be able to suss out somebody like yourself and to know the difference between maybe a boutique guitar that they don't actually have the experience with the fret and the nut and the way.
So here's the thing. Even on a custom build, which is a fully custom order, we give everybody a 48-hour approval once they've received the guitar, grace period. With a custom build, there is a restocking fee because that's a fully custom guitar to that person. You know, even though it's one of our models, it's how they wanted it. So if they buy a shop spec guitar, we take it back with no restock fee, right? So it's important to research who you're buying from. You know, I try to give the same service, even though they're buying directly from us, as, you know, the best dealer would give. You know what I mean? We're just cutting out the middleman. You know, it's like, and obviously not everybody cares that much. I feel like you have to really research the person's reputation, how much they care about their work, and how willing they are to redo things or make it right if there is a problem. And I know there's been certainly a fucking hell of a lot of damage done to the boutique industry from certain people, certain builders. I'm not going to name names, but
personalities,
who have done, who behave in a personal way, and don't realize this is a business. It's never personal. You know, it's if there's a problem with the guitar, just fucking fix it. You know what I mean? If there's a problem with the guitar, it's going to cost you less to take it back and refret it, whatever you have to do, put on a new neck, give them new whatever the hell you have to do, refinish it, then to argue and to damage your business and your reputation. That is insane to me that somebody would even do that. It might not be convenient. It might be expensive. It might take time to redo that. You might have to rebuild a significant part of the guitar and you have to take a loss, but that'll teach you to not fucking mess it up next time. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then you might fall into a situation, you know, from a business standpoint where the person is just unreasonable and it has to come down to facts and logic, you know? So if it's factual and if somebody's just like, well, I don't like the tone of this, I'm like, look, they all more or less are going to sound very similar. We build a vintage style guitar. It's going to sound, you've heard the online demos. We wind the pickups all this. They all have their own personalities and characteristics, but they're all about the same. Yeah, exactly. They're all about the same thing, at least the stuff we build. So that tone is subjective, but there are things that are not subjective, like playability, quality, and craftsmanship, which are not subjective at all. They're very much on or off. You know what I mean? So I think reputation, our shop in Greenpoint, again, it's our workshop where we build and repair guitars. And it's also, there's a little display area, like a tiny little showroom, you could call it, where you can come and test and buy our guitars. So if you come to New York City, you can certainly call us, make an appointment, come by and check out our stuff. Or if you just can't, and a lot of our sales are just people that can't, and they just buy them in other states and they trust me. And, you know, we really appreciate that. Because if there ever is a problem, I think there's been one problem ever where like, something happened where the pickup just wasn't working, and I just sent the person I made a new pickup. I didn't even ask for the old one back, and I just sent it over. You know what I mean? That's a warranty
it's
issue.
bound to happen, especially when you're making things by hand and shipping, and just things happen. And it's not that if they happen, it's how you handle it when it does happen.
Yeah, things can happen in terms of if I can build a guitar with perfect fretwork, and it leaves New York City, and it goes. Let's say it goes from the East Coast to the West Coast in the winter. That's a completely different environment. By the time, let's say it gets to California, you could have a 70-degree day in February versus a 30-degree day and dry here. And what happens is that the fretboard could expand or something like that could happen. And, you know, you might buzz, you know, even though I did a perfect fret job, you might buzz. So you might have to do a setup, or you might even have to do a fret level. And it doesn't mean we didn't do our job. It just means things can happen.
Yes, maybe wood ebbs and flows. It changes.
Obviously, if you're in New York or you're nearby, I can redo that very quickly. It's a quick fix. Then, you know, we get into, all right, do you want to ship it back to us? And then, you know, we might have to risk that happening again, or we might have to just sort that out in a different way. And honestly, that's not really a warranty issue. That's just a natural thing that can happen to guitars.
Right.
Warranty is just a bad craftsmanship thing, you know what I mean? Or a failure of something. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tricky thing of touring with guitars. I mean, I run into that. It was when I was on tour, I had a telly out with me, and I forget where I was. I was playing. I did a session at Sweetwater. They actually have a recording studio there.
Yeah.
And I was touring with this artist, and we did a session there where they record us and as a demonstration for this class, and I pulled the telly out of the case, and it was just like it was not having the change, because we had driven quite a few hours, and it went through some changes.
Oh, totally.
And it was just, I had to give it to the tech, and then luckily they have tech there, and so they just fixed it for me and put new strings on it really quickly. But it's just the guitars, the acoustics. I always have some.
I'm always afraid when people come to us right before they're going on tour, because I'm like, look, it's gonna be perfect. You test it when it leaves here, whether it's a repair or it's a build. But I'm like, once you go on tour, man, it's like, especially if it's a brand new guitar, it's let it settle for a bit.
Because you're getting on airplanes, you're getting off, all of a sudden it's cold in the airplane.
Take your more settled guitars on tour. Give it a guitar that's at least been around for like 3 or 4 years, or that's kind of why we use the roasted necks and those kind of things. Is they're less likely to be affected by that. Doesn't mean that it never happens. It means it's you try to rule it out as much as possible.
Right. It's more, in theory, it's more age. It's gone through a bit of aging process.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's drier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I had a friend who I recommend to you who bought a guitar recently, Jeff.
Jeff Lippman.
Yeah.
Really cool guy.
Yeah, and he just loves the guitar. And
he plays the shit out of it. I saw it recently for a setup. I'm like, this thing looks like you've had it for like 4 years. He's had it for like, I think, a little over a year. Or
he's totally just gigging with it all the time, playing with it. And it was just the conversation we had before. We were talking about. I was talking about the guitars, and it was just a thing that I've always been impressed with. And I think that some people were like, "What's the difference between a stock guitar and a hand-built guitar?" And when you play one, if you play one built by somebody who really knows what they're doing, the evidence comes clear. It doesn't mean that you can't make great music on any guitar,
right? But
it's a nicer experience, and your guitars are light and resonant, and the playability is a huge thing, but also the resonance, like how they ring, how they're balanced. Like you'll notice sometimes. A lot of times, like stock guitars are just put together. They're not matching pieces together, right? It's like, here we put a neck on this guitar, and maybe a custom shop is a little bit more, but a lot of times it's just like they have parts in bulk and they use them.
Right.
But you're matching them, and then you're playing a guitar. No matter where you're playing on the guitar neck, there's no dead notes, or every note is the same volume as the other one, and it just sings, and the natural like sustain of the instrument is I think really impressive. I've always noticed that when I play guitars, and that's one thing Jeff was nerding out about was just like, this thing is.
Well, here's my reply to that is, I have guitar necks that I built like 4 or 5 years ago that I still haven't found the right body for, because like we really make the guitar and we match them. You know what I mean? It's like, and those necks are the same style and they're the same fit as the current necks we're making, but they just, I've put them together, and something may have been, it could even be in my head. Something may have been off. And
is it a sound? Is it a feel? Like,
it's everything. It's the final weight. It's the feel. It could be like just the acoustic sound. Cause at that point I'm just listening to it acoustically. Cause obviously, pickups are a huge factor of your final tone. Obviously they're a significant part of it, but the wood does also make a difference in my opinion. Some people say it doesn't, but in my opinion,
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I'm not in that camp. I think it takes away and adds things. I mean, I don't think it's like, oh, this is warm and this is bright, or it just takes away and adds frequencies. I mean, that's how I look at wood. So I'm going for a feel and an appearance and a tone when I match two things together. And they can always be pine and roasted maple, neck and body, but even those together, you want to always find the right pair, so that's important to me, Yeah,
I imagine you have a pretty good sense of that now, right? From having built so many guitars
over the years,
just sense and be like, I know this is not doing that thing.
It's rare that even happens, but like that it's off, but it because usually things go pretty well. But yeah, there are times where I'm like, we're gonna find the right thing for this, and I'm gonna set it aside for a few years, and one day it will happen. Yeah. So yeah, that does happen. Luckily, most of the time things are pretty compatible, though. So yeah. Also, you can take a mass-produced guitar and make it better. Obviously, you can detail the hell out of it. You can do the fretwork. You can build a bone nut. You can put hand-wound pickups. You can do all the stuff at that point you're close to the price range of like entry-level boutique. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and you don't get the benefit most of the time of having like the light nitro finish and the body resonate that way. I feel like with your guitars, it's almost like I mean, they're a solid body, but they almost have like more resonance of like a hollow body guitar. Like I almost hear more harmonics or something resonating off the actual body. Like there's just these extra frequenes I really feel are there.
Yeah, that could be a combo of of everything.
That's not
really
plugged in either. That's just
right.
acoustic.
Yeah. So that comes down to the wood. It comes down to having. We do use extremely, almost to a fault, extremely light finishes. Super thin. They're like sometimes they're the thickness of like a piece of paper. The final that's like clear coats, color, and top coats. They're super thin, meaning you're not gonna have a pristine guitar no matter what. Once you buy one of ours, it's within the first week you're gonna put scratches and chips into it.
Right.
But that's what we want. The trade off is you're gonna have a phenomenal resonant ringing guitar. So. I'm always going to take that.
Yeah, you're making them for players and people that understand that nuance.
I'm making them for the people that it's a specific, they're not for everybody. They're for the right person, what I mean? And those are the people that end up finding us.
Right. And there's a lot of those people who understand those qualities in a guitar.
The distinguished gearhead.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it is a thing, speaking of the thin finishes, like on the older 50s guitars, how thin were the finishes? Are yours thinner than they were?
It's, I've never really taken a caliper, but I would think they're in the 10,000s or less, because I've never chipped a 50s guitar to measure its finish, but I would say ours are there or thinner.
I'm sure somebody will lend you one.
Yeah. Let me chip your pre-CBS Fender so we can find out the exact thickness of an aged finish. So ours are there or thinner, and I don't say that as a marketing thing. I don't think it's necessarily better to have them thinner, but they're thinner because a lot of the grain on our guitars are textured and they pop. So you have to put it on thin for that. You know what I mean? So there are extremely thin finishes.
You're trying to keep that popped look, right?
Yeah, we even sand them in such a way that it accentuates that, so it looks, you can see the wood grain even on a solid body finish or an opaque finish, you know what I mean? So a solid color, you can still see the grain through it, which is kind of cool that way, But not everybody likes that, and some people request us not to do it, and those we just sand flat like a normal guitar. But yeah, the final thickness of our finishes, which I do know that they're generally 10,000s or less, which is the thickness of a high E string typically. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, or less. So yeah.
I like the thin finishes. I've never been one to worry about scratches and stuff. I don't like playing guitars that don't have scratches on them.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate certain guitars require a super perfect finish. Like there are certain guitars, they're not the kind of guitars that we build though, or they're not necessarily the kind of guitars that I'm interested in owning either. They're guitars that I appreciate because from an artistic standpoint, and there are certain builders that only build a pristine thing, and I certainly appreciate. Like if you're buying like a high-end like arch top, you don't want to beat up finish necessarily, so I appreciate that. Certainly.
Right,
yeah, but it's just not what I'm interested in. You kind of just end up building what you like, you know what I mean? So
I think that's great. I mean, I think one of the faults I've seen some people have is that they want to please everybody instead of just picking the thing that you're good at. And
you got to at least have a vision and not kind of be all over the place, Otherwise I would just be building copies of, straight up copies of other brands, and there's certainly a market for that. Just do a high-end version of that, but it just doesn't excite me, Yeah.
Right. It's better to have your own voice.
I have friends that do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not what I'm. It needs to be, a very unique and creative thing for me.
How is, speaking of friends and that build guitars, like how is the boutique guitar market? Is it a pretty friendly place? Is it hard to get footing in there? Is it competitive? Like,
well, it is competitive, but it's also friendly. You have to meet the right people, I would say. Luckily, I am friends with a lot of people that do this in New York City and around the country, But especially in New York, there aren't that many of us that are good at doing this. There's a small bunch of us. You know what I mean? So I'm either friends or friendly with most of those people, whether it be repair people or builders, and it's generally pretty friendly. I haven't really had any problems with anybody, honestly. I mean, I wouldn't name names either way.
Well, but it's like not everybody's trying to cut each other's throats.
Right? Yeah, I feel like if I meet somebody. I'm pretty good at sensing those things. If I meet somebody who I feel like is that way, I kind of just distance myself, and I don't care what they think about me. I just kind of stop talking to them, or I just don't respond to them or anything. Yeah. So then again, I also don't do a lot of the shows. I attend them as a guest, but I don't. I'm not big on guitar shows. I'm more about just promoting our own. I mean, sometimes I will do them. If like I have done the NAB show and. I'm open to guitar shows, but I'm not necessarily a fan of that whole experience, and
it's kind of crazy, right? And even it's not necessarily your audience either, right?
Well, there's things that happen in New York or in New York City, even in Brooklyn, that I'd rather just attend. You know what I mean? I don't want to be there all day trying to sell guitars. I'd rather just sell my guitars online or in person or whatever it is. I feel like I'd rather just take that effort and put it into marketing or advertisements and things like that. Yeah. I think we're just at such a time where the way things were done with guitar shows and certainly guitar stores are becoming somewhat antiquated. I can't think in 10, 15 years that that's going to be the thing anymore. The brick and mortar guitar store, I'm sure it'll always exist on some level, but I don't think it's as crucial for someone like me with a unique and boutique product. I think our thing isn't necessarily getting into all the stores. I mean,
right.
I'm open to. We don't really work with dealers right now because I ended those relationships. We used to in the past, but I may be open to it on some small level in the future. Maybe even in the near future, where we'll do a very limited run of guitars, in Texas or in other countries and things like that. We'll see.
Right, but you don't have to because of the way the internet and stuff works now.
And I think just we're really lucky to be in New York City, where there's just a constant flow of people. New York City could be its own goddamn country. I mean? It's like that's really, for anybody who's never been here, there's 9 million people who live in a what, like a 15-mile radius?
Yeah, totally.
Right? So it's
the
like
density.
It's just luckily, once you've carved something out for yourself, it is extremely difficult to do that here, and it's expensive. But if you got in early enough and you're able to do that, people will come to you. And if you care about the quality of your work and your reputation, then people will really come to you.
Yeah. People will seek that out here.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
Everybody, and there's people that are seeking out people who are the best at what they do.
Kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. You kind of have to be on 10 at all times. Yeah.
And you've started collaborating with other builders. I mean, like amp builders, and you're making pedals now. So your collaboration with Henry Amps. Let's talk about that for a second. So you're making an amp together, an FSC branded.
So that started. That relationship started at the 2020 NAMM show, right before COVID kind of went crazy. The 2020 NAMM show, we needed some amps for our guitars, and JP and I started talking, and he sent some Henry amps down.
I wonder who recommended it.
Was it you? Yeah. Was it you? Oh, yeah, I forgot. Shit. Oh, my God. Wow. I forgot how that... I thought I couldn't remember how that's... Okay, so you introduced us, right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, so then we started talking online. And it's funny, he and I still haven't met, in
really?
person. No,
he's
not met in
such a
person.
nice guy,
Yeah, absolutely. He's a pleasure to work with, and very, very talented person. So... I forgot that you introduced us. So he sent some amps down to California. I was already there with our guitars, and he shipped them over. And I got to say, he didn't even really ask for anything, which is really gracious. He kind of shipped them back and forth. And years later, then COVID happened. Everything went fucking upside down. And, I hadn't spoken to him in some time. And then I think maybe 2 years ago, we started talking about, hey, why don't we do a guitar in exchange for an amp? I'll build you a custom guitar. I built him a Tele style guitar. Honestly, one of our best guitars. It was hard letting that one go. I really love that guitar, and he really loves it too. And everybody in the shop really loves. I was like, man, can we just build another one that looks just like it and keep this one? So it was supposed
but for
to be
the record, you didn't. You gave him the good one, right?
Oh yeah, no. It's one of one. There's not even another guitar that we've built that even looks like that. That's one of one. So it's a totally original looking. It has a gold foil on the neck and a 52 style Tele bridge pickup, and it's just that thing. I think it was a single piece swamp ash body, which is a little different than what we use now, but it's one of the last ones I had. The lightweight, good swamp ash that you used to be able to get. Yeah. So that guitar was phenomenal. Anyway, so the deal was, can you build me a one-off amp based on a vintage Bassman, but with the lush reverb. And he came up with the idea of doing the Dumble mods too, and the master volume. So that became, the minute I heard it, I was like, holy fuck! Like, this amp is. I mean, I'm like, this needs to be a product. I can't be the only person on earth with this. So that's now something that I market, and he builds them. It's something that I sort of co-designed with him, but he does all the he's got the know-how with amps and everything. I don't know how to build an amp. You know what I mean? I know how to throw out ideas. And so that was a collaborative thing. And also another person we've collaborated with is on both the pedals, the KB1 and the FSC Fuzz. Ben Fisher, he's tubular audio. He's in Greenpoint. He does repair and things like that in studios.
Like amp repair,
and pedal repair and electronics repair. And he's a very smart guy. He's ridiculously smart.
Does he repair pedals as well?
He does, yeah.
Okay, that's good to know, because I believe he does questions about that.
Yeah, you should get in touch with him. He's a little hard to reach, but I'll give you his information. Yeah, he's extremely smart, extremely talented guy. He's very young, so I'm curious to see what he's going to do within the next 10 years. You know, yeah, I think he's still in his 20s. So a very smart guy. He knocked out the pedal. I worked with a lot of people on the first pedal, and it did not go well. I won't say who, but it really did not go well. And then Ben nailed it in fucking 2 weeks.
Wow.
Where other people spent like 10 months on it. You know what I mean? So he nailed it in 2 weeks, and it was better than I could have imagined. You know, so I was like, that's it. That's our guy. You know, so I don't think we're going to do a lot of pedals, but the two that we have, we'll see how things go in the future with new designs, but I'm very happy with what we have now, you know.
Maybe you do have an update. You're slightly changing the models, or at least with the KB. You're doing the KB2 now, right?
Yeah, the KB1 is getting a slight update with the KB2. I'll talk about that more, you know, as it comes out. It's basically going to be a different version of the second distortion. The second foot switch, the second stage of drive on that is going to be more mellow. It's just going to be a clean boost rather than a heavier distortion on top of
people that don't know what the KB is. It's a clon, right? But not a. It's not a 100%.
Right.
Not 100% traditional clone.
Right, exactly.
In the sense that you've added another side to it that on the KB1 has like a distortion circuit into it, but now you're adding like a clean boost circuit into
this one will be essentially the same as the first foot switch, which is that vintage pedal. And then the second foot switch, it just adds a clean boost to it. So it'll take you know, a lot of people use those pedals as always on, you know, just kind of a nice crunchy tone or very mild drive. And then the second foot switch will just add a clean boost to that now. So it'll push you into lead territory.
Post gain.
Yeah. So it'll take you just a little heavier. That's it. It won't be a big distortion. It'll just be a little extra kick, you know, and it's very nice. I have the prototype, and they're going to come out by the summer. Yeah.
I'm excited to hear that. I've tried so many different of the circuits that now isn't so much a secret anymore. But despite that, like, people don't always get it right, you know?
Well, that's why, I mean, I know that I'm not an amp and pedal guy in terms of engineering and building, so that's why I'm trying to work with, you know, really talented people like Ben and JP.
Yeah, that one sounds great. I play it, and it's the ones that are right that you have. There's a chiminess to it that you can get almost like out of it. And
right, and we are using the diode, the vintage Russian diodes and everything. You know, I bought them from Russia. You know, and when all that conflict in Russia started or in Ukraine started, I realized I was like, I better buy a big stock because who knows what's going to happen in the world, you know? Right. So we're good for now. We'll see what happens going forward, you know? Yeah.
And can we talk about the fuzz?
Yep.
What did you different? It was based on the fuzz phase circuit, the germanium, or is it the silicone?
Well, we use silicone transistors, but it is based on a germanium pedal. The circuit has been modified for it to behave in a more germanium way. So it does kind of clean up with your volume and it does have a very nice tone, classic tone, but it can get pretty heavy too. It's really nice. It can get very heavy, you know, and what we modified about that is we gave it a much more usable volume sweep. You know, those vintage fuzzes are great when everything's on 10, you know? Yeah. We gave it much more sweep on both the volume and the fuzz, you know, the gain. We added a bias knob, which will it will give it that intentional malfunctioning sound if you want that.
Gating.
That gated. It can go fully gated to fully open, you know. Right.
Which you get from germanium, which you don't usually
get. Yeah. You get that when the pedal is actually if it's a hot day or something, you know. But our pedal won't do that. It doesn't have any temperature issues because it's actually.
It makes it a lot easier to tour with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the whole point of it. But you can get that as an effect if you want it. You know, the thing that people don't want, you can get that as an effect because I like that effect.
Yeah, me
I think
too.
It's really cool.
I don't like it as a surprise.
Right. Nobody wants that as a surprise. Yeah.
So sometimes you forget you're on tour with a germanium fuzz until you're on a festival stage, like with direct sunlight.
Oh yeah, summertime.
And all of a sudden you kick it on, and you're like, "What's going on?
Right. Yeah.
What's going on?" And you're like, "Oh wait, I'm in the sun."
Exactly. So that doesn't happen with our pedal, but you can make that happen if you want. You know. And so it's a really cool recording effect. I think it's a very cool effect to have. And then we've added some, you know, low and high impedance switch. So if you can put the fuzz in different parts of your chain if you want, and then it also has. This was actually Ross and Ben's idea, which they got me to begrudgingly agree to, which I love now. It has a mid boost switch. It goes from off, you know, which is just the fuzz pedal, to a pre and post mid kick, which kind of gives it a halfway that wah effect. You know what I mean?
Like cocked wah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really cool effect. You know, to really cut through the mix, and it just gets a really nice mid-rangey sound out of it. So I'm really glad I agreed to that because at first I was like, why do we need this? You know, but
It's a really nice feature because one thing that happens with a fuzz face, and this happens with big muffs too, sometimes on stage, if you're in a trio, it's fine. But if you have a fuller band, because the fuzz faces have a bit of that scooped sound, you're playing really loud, but you can't be heard.
Kind of get lost in the mix.
You get lost. So having that mid-range bump, and you don't have to try. You're not cranking as loud, and you can be heard.
Yeah, I agree. That's something I'm finding myself using all the time now. So even in small recordings, so it's just just a nice little added effect.
And you have your availability for 9-volt power too, which is nice. I'm usually a stickler about I only run my fuzz pedals on batteries, like cheap batteries, like those cheap Panasonic ones.
No, I understand.
So I usually don't think that they sound good with power. I can hear it, but I use yours all the time with the power supply running through my Strymon power supplies, and it sounds great. And
I'm gonna give Ben the credit for all that because I think he's legitimately a genius, and his circuits are something else. These are all the circuit boards that he designed for us from scratch. They're all unique and custom, and they're all based. Basically what FSC comes down to is we like vintage things, but we like them updated for today. You know what I mean? So, but we want to keep that tone with some of the features, both in our guitars, our amp, and our pedals. It's always the same thing. It's based on that vintage sound. It's based on that vintage experience, minus the vintage problems that occur in terms of playability and function. That's really the simplest way to look at our entire brand and just everything I like personally. So
it's interesting to me too, as I'm having this conversation, I'm kind of seeing this full perspective of actually what you do now in a different light, in the sense that you have these guitars that are very much speak like a fine instrument. Resonate, they play, they feel like a fine instrument. And then you've now working with Henry on these amps, and it's very much about an era of amp where the amp did a lot of lifting. It wasn't like you had a giant pedal board.
Right.
You had to have a great guitar and a great amp to make it work.
Yeah.
And now your pedals are also specific pedals that are designed to work with the guitar and the amp. But a fuzz-based pedal typically interacts with the guitar a lot.
Yeah.
And then a Klon design style pedal wasn't designed as an overdrive pedal. It was designed as a hot boost pedal to interact with the amplifier.
Yeah.
So it seems like everything you're working on here it's all the companies and the ideas you have. It's all about the dynamic of an instrument and how the symbiotic relationship between the pedal, and guitar, and an amp.
Well, in a perfect world, everybody's going to buy the full FSC rig, which I play through, which is, you can see it on our Instagram. It's the guitar, the pedal, and the amp. It's all, we only use obviously FSC things in demos, from guitar to amp. So yeah, it's the whole experience. But of course, a lot of people just buy one thing, and that's totally fine too.
Do you have an FSC cable?
Not yet. Strings, picks. I don't have any interest in that yet. We'll see. Maybe when I'm older. Not yet.
You have FSC clothing. Everything has to be FSC.
I'm wearing the hat. Yeah,
you're wearing the hat.
Yep.
Yeah.
We do have the shirts and hats. Yeah,
that's great. Okay, that's awesome. Yeah. It's. I think that's just. I think a testament to your awareness of the whole line of where sound comes from. It's not just you're a guitar builder, but you understand like the function and the communication. Between.
I mean, think about how much of your guitar tone is affected by the speaker of your amp. It's everything. It's everything. It's everything, really. It's the guitar, it's the pedals, it's the amp, it's the speaker. It's
an electric guitar. The instrument is itself. A guitar and an amplifier, and if you have any effects in it, that is what makes the whole instrument.
That's what we all go for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Unless you're playing the guitar just acoustically in your room, which fine, that's fine too. You can buy an electric guitar and do that with it, but we want to cover all the bases.
Right. And the pedals are available on FSCinstruments.com.
Yeah, everything is.
And the amps are the amps only exclusively sold on your website, or are they at henryamps.com as well?
I believe they're also linked to the Henry website. They are sold through our website, or you can come in person to the shop. But yeah, the shop is essentially online or in New York City.
New York City, okay. And so people can inquire and then go through the discussing with you the setup process.
Definitely, yeah. Once the order's put in, it just goes straight to the Henry shop, and he does. He builds the amp. There's obviously a wait list. It's not terribly long. Yeah.
And the same goes for the guitars, FSC Instruments.
Yeah, the guitars and the pedals are built in-house at our shop in Brooklyn, and the only thing that's not built in-house are the amps. Yeah.
And if you're in New York City, you can go to fscinstruments.com to see about repairs, setups.
Everything.
Yeah, sure.
And I should mention that Henry is only an hour away from New York City, so he's very close.
Yeah, right across the river in Jersey, right?
I think he's in. God, I forget what part of Jersey, but it's a very
Elizabeth, or is it here or there?
I gotta look. I gotta ask him, but I know it's like pretty much on the border.
Yeah,
it's a very close part to New York.
Totally. Yeah. It's just like another suburb of New York. Almost,
right. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. This has been a great interview. It's been so interesting learning.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
History and
thank you. I appreciate it. This was great. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming. And go to fscinstruments.com and go online and hear why everybody is saying such great things, including me, about these instruments and pedals. On my website, anatomyofguitartone.com, I've reviewed both of the pedals, the KB1 and the FSC Fuzz, which you'll have sound examples and me discussing about all the components in it and stuff. So anatomyofguitartone.com. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Anatomy of Tone. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Farhad. I know I enjoyed sitting down and learning more about him. And go and check out fscinstruments.com. I think you'll be as impressed as I am. If you're digging this podcast, leave me a review through the various outlets that you're listening to. It really helps the algorithm know that I'm here and for other guitarists and musicians to discover the podcast. I'll see you in 2 weeks for the next podcast.